Welcome to this week's Oxford Analytica video briefing. I am Stephanie Hare, Senior Analyst for Western Europe, and I'm in conversation with Oxford University's Dr. David Hein to discuss developments in Italy. David, thanks so much again for joining us.
Great pleasure.
Now, Prime Minister Enrico Letta has a new headache, as does former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, and this all came to a head to everyone's great shock yesterday. Can you talk us through what has happened?
I can. The executive summary of what's happened is that unexpectedly the Court of Cassation, which is the highest appeal court, has decided to hear the final appeal in Mr. Berlusconi's extremely serious tax evasion case, a case that has led to a sentence of imprisonment, which will probably be suspended. And along with that will go exclusion from public office for a significant period of time, 4 or 5 years. It was thought that this case was going to be brought to the final appeal in the autumn. But had it been brought in the autumn, for various technical legal reasons, the final decision probably wouldn't have taken place till well into 2014. In other words, Mr. Berlusconi would have continued on in public life while those processes were taking place. If the appeal court takes its decision at the end of July, those technical factors won't come into play. The final decision will be taken immediately. And that could mean that by the end of July, Mr. Berlusconi is out of public life. Against all the protestations of him, his party, about his innocence, his claims of judicial persecution, there theoretically won't be anything he can do. So suddenly this decision this week by the Court of Cassation has accelerated what was a background worry. Right. And it's brought it right up front. And whereas not very long ago Mr. Letta's government looked a little bit more stable than it had been at its formation a couple of months ago, now it looks extremely fragile. Now, how are we expecting Berlusconi's political party, the People of Liberty, to behave? Because, of course, Letta's coalition government relies on its political support. Absolutely. It's an odd coalition, a very broad coalition of two parties, one on the left, Democratic Party, one on the right, the PDL. PDL itself is, like many conservative parties, divided between a rather populist, anti-European right, it's trying to see off challenges from further right, and a group of moderate technocrats, probably pro-Europeans. So they have different views about how it should react anyway. The radicals want to come out, rise up against this decision. The moderates are much more circumspect because they know that somehow or other Italy has to have a government. It looks like the only government that can be formed is Mr. Letta's. If Mr. Letta's government falls, there'll probably be a general election. If there's a general election, there'll be no change because the electoral system won't allow that. And therefore the moderates think that you have to move very carefully. We don't quite know what Mr. Berlusconi's own position is, but it's a good bet that there will be the most tremendous fuss at the end of July, at the least. Could be that the summer holidays intervene and the whole thing is postponed for a month, but some pretty tough decisions have got to be taken if the Court of Appeal does confirm that Mr. Berlusconi was rightfully found guilty of major tax evasion and should be removed from public office for a very long period of time. And if that happens, there are only really two further possibilities. One is that the Senate, of which Mr. Berlusconi is a member, refuses to lift his immunity from prosecution. And the other is a presidential pardon. But both those courses, to keep the PDL and Mr. Berlusconi, as it were, in the political game and working with the coalition, both those are fraught with problems and would probably be very difficult. They seem to flout the rule of law, although strictly speaking they'd be legal. And they would be an enormous gift to the third party in the system, movement, Mr. Grillo's, which is anti-party, anti-corruption, populist in its own way, but claims that politicians are all in it together. And if this conspiracy to keep Berlusconi out of jail, out of the trouble that he's in, were to be brought to bear to keep the coalition together, that would just prove how corrupt the politicians are. So very difficult to do that.
Now I'd like to introduce another element into this discussion, which is the link between political dysfunction or political instability and the economic fortunes of a country. And of course we've had instability in Portugal, neighboring Portugal. Last week 2 ministers resigned from that government. We've had the president yesterday calling for some sort of national salvation agreement with the possibility of early elections next year. Now, Portugal was immediately punished in the bond markets last week for this instability. The yield on its 10-year bond shot up over 8%. Is Italy going to be treated the same way, or have markets priced in political dysfunction for Italy?
Italy's debt position in the short term is probably sustainable. The Treasury and the Bank of Italy manage things pretty well. Markets seem to have confidence that they don't have to worry about these things right now. In fact, nobody really has to worry about these things until after the German election in September anyway. And so Italy is sort of well back from the front line that Greece and Portugal sit in right now. And I don't think that position will change. Although were the PDL to withdraw from the coalition in late July, that might well change perceptions. A big political crisis in Italy pre-August, with little prospect of a resolution and a high prospect of a general election, looks bad. Looks extremely bad. So markets might then turn.
Interesting. It's difficult for us to even contemplate a political landscape without Berlusconi because he's been in office for, what, about 20 years or so?
Yeah.
Does the PDL have someone who could step up and really to take his place if he were forced onto the sidelines?
Yes, it has Angelino Alfano, who is effectively the leader of the party in the coalition. He's Deputy Prime Minister. He's a very, very capable politician, extremely able man. But he's not everybody's cup of tea in the party. And moreover, Berlusconi has financed the party, has built the party. It's Berlusconi's name, it's Berlusconi's aura. Strong Sicilian politician that he is, Alfano is not Berlusconi. So getting to agreement on what the party stands for, represents, its attitude to Europe, how it sees off the Northern League in the north and Grillo all over the country, takes a lot of working through. Berlusconi's point is, I'm not giving up. And well into his 70s, he hasn't given up, and therefore he hasn't been willing to contemplate a successor. So grooming that successor, raising his or her profile, is very difficult.
Right. Thank you so much, David, for this fascinating description and analysis of what's happening in Italy and the implications for Europe. David will be joining us on our panel at the Global Horizons Conference in September. That's the 18th to the 20th of September at Christ Church, Oxford University. We hope to see you there.